Unleash the power of your mind. Wear a levity, raw, edgy, humorless apparel for the discriminating activists. Live free or cry. Welcome to the Time of the Reason podcast show. We're not looking for ratings. We are not here to support and to create sensationalism. We are not here to entertain. We are here to give due diligence to the pressing human, economic, environmental, political, and social issues that affect humankind. We are here to promote thinking. And why not? Look around. Anger, hate, division, chaos, and conflict between people abounds. It's everywhere these days. Unchallenged narcissism is flourishing. Consequences for antisocial behavior are non-existent. People are supporting unsubstantiated claims. Many are mindless, following narratives that divide people, blindly canceling, censoring, and ridiculing others who don't believe what they believe. We wonder, is logic and reason dead? Is critical thinking over? Does common sense even matter? Now, more than ever, is the time to revive reason. Unless we do so, humankind is riding a one-way runaway train into oblivion. Think about it. We must think. Thank you for listening again to another episode of the Time of the Reason podcast show. Let's get started.
What we've got here is failure to communicate.
Welcome back to another episode of the Time of the Reason podcast show. Dan Ploger, my co-host, and myself, we were formerly Mind Matters, and we're talking about issues of extreme importance. On today's episode, we'll be discussing information and the search for the truth in an information rat race. And just real briefly here, back in the day, we could trust the news sources that we saw. There might have been 3 or 4 channels here in the U.S., but we could also have reasonable trust in the people in important places giving us the news. And today we're bombarded 365, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, with hundreds and hundreds of news outlets, to also include people. People get their news now from Facebook. It's a little bit of there's a lot of angst, there's a lot of frustration, there's a lot of narcissism, there's a lot of things going on that just don't seem healthy for humankind. And what Dan had discussed today, the types of information and what we can do as human beings to exercise due diligence and critical thought. So, Dan, that being said, what types of information are we being hit with every day?
Well, can I back up just a little bit?
Absolutely.
All of us seek information in the form of what we call truth. And so I think that we need to talk about truth a little bit. What is it that we are after? So what is truth? Truth is, we have to define it. It is a fact or a series of facts that 2 people can agree on or more. But it takes 2 people to agree on them. If you're the only one that's seeing the truth, so to speak, then you'll have a hard time proving it's the truth. And this even goes back to the scientific method and define ways in which we find the truth and certain strategies that are accepted in seeking the truth, and even not only accepted, but encouraged. And in the scientific method, people don't understand that it is essential in that what's being posed as scientific facts are actually are things that can be reproduced and things that we open to the world to criticize. That's the whole idea is that if there's only one thing that can survive all of this criticism, and that is the truth. So given that we all want the truth, but there's a lot of information out there that's not the truth. What kinds of information? How can we classify information that will help us maybe better understand our quest for the truth? And that is that if we can say that reliable information is information that's seeking the truth, can be verified by other individuals or institutions, then we will say, okay, so what we're all after is reliable information. Well, what other types of information are there? Well, we've all heard these, but let's talk about the definitions of them a little bit. There's misinformation, disinformation, malinformation, and then just plain old noise. So these constitute the entire spectrum of what we call information in our daily lives and what we seek. So let's talk about what are the non-reliable types of information. This will help us understand, I think, people's sources of information and their motives. Misinformation is just that. It's a mistake. So think of it in that way. It's something where a message was transferred to you that said the card was a 4 of diamonds, but in reality, it was a 7 of hearts. It was just, this was not intended to deceive you. It's just a mistake. But nonetheless, we have to be alert to these mistakes. The next type of information we come across is disinformation. And disinformation is, I guess, what I would classify anyway as the legacy media feeding propaganda. Propaganda is a form of disinformation. It is information that is intended to mislead you. So there's no shame in it. If I'm trying to mislead you and you're misled, great, I've accomplished my goal. If I'm trying to mislead you and you're not, great. Okay, good for you. A third type of information is, so we've got misinformation, which are mistakes. We've got disinformation, which is propaganda, intentionally intended to mislead and lead you in different directions. Another type is malinformation. And think of malware on your computer. It's something that is put to interfere. It's something that's put between you and your source of information, intended to mislead you or to direct you away from a particular source of information for nefarious purposes. So in the final type of information that we run across, it's just plain noise. And noise is something that I guess everybody's familiar with the classroom experiment we all did in elementary school, where somebody sent a message to the front left part of the room, and a secret message that nobody else heard, but the first person in the row, and the second person's job is to relay that information to the second person. And the second person in turn relays that information to the third, and so on. And by the time you get to the end of the classroom, the message has been so distorted it bears no resemblance to what the original was. And this is noise. And noise just happens because we live in an imperfect world. It's the same reason when you, well, for those old enough, they used to have antennas on the top of their television sets. It's what we tried. We were constantly fighting when trying to receive a television signal. Noise comes in two categories. One is intrusive noise, noise which is not a part of the original message. It's just stuff that comes in. It's just interference that's there because we live in an imperfect world. And the other type of noise is noise that's generated within the messages themselves, but for whatever reasons, just due to the same reason that if you put a first generation photograph in a copy machine and take a copy of that, and then you take that copy and run it through the copy machine again, and run it through the copy machine again, and again, and again, and again, and eventually you'll just end up with a gray blob. This is noise that comes from within the messages. So those of us that are seeking the truth, you can see now that, hold it, it's the truth is more than just the truth. It's pretty involved. If I'm a critical thinker, I have to really have my thinking boots on. I have to evaluate a source of information, and I have to try and categorize that. Is this information? Is this closer to akin to the truth? Is this a function of deductive reasoning? Is this a function of whatever? Or is this, is this information somehow it has difficulty passing the smell test, and which is another important aspect of evaluating information and the veracity of information. Go ahead. I see.
No. I'm thinking. I just, to recap very briefly, because I think the smell test is the inductive reasoning that we're getting to as part of that,
exactly.
that process. So let's just recap. So human beings are bombarded from a number of various sources all the time these days with information. And what we're trying to decide is the reliability. So these different sources of information, as you pointed out, Dan, have various agendas or various reasons for putting out what they put out. So we have misinformation, which is probably the least nefarious of all of them. It's just a mistake. You thought you saw something or you didn't see something, and which actually ties into noise, but it's just the wrong information. Then you have the propaganda that, if you do a little bit of investigating, that's the disinformation. Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. Even though he's telling you something that sounds really nice, don't pay attention to him because it's propaganda. He would be putting out disinformation, if I'm following you correctly. Then there's malinformation, which is just totally wrong, meant to throw you completely off the truth, if you will. And usually it's done by nefarious forces, the enemy, so to speak. It takes a lot of discernment sometimes to figure that, or sometimes it's so outrageous you can discern it immediately. And then we have the noise, which is basically distorted perceptions, intrusive, nonetheless, but it just adds to the information mainstream. So how do we figure out, or how do we find the truth, which is what you're getting at now? And that takes deductive reasoning, which is the scientific method, and then the smell test. So are we right where we're at right now?
Right, exactly. And what we're coming to is what tools do we have available to determine the reliability of a particular type of information. And the tools we have are two. One is deductive reasoning, which is going through a series of cause and effect relationships to arrive at the conclusion, the observation, and that all of the preceding events followed a logical sequence. Bowling pin A hit bowling pin B and knocked bowling pin B over. That's deductive reasoning, cause and effect. And that represents 1/2 of our intellectual capability. And this is, when I say our, I mean human beings. And I also mean, I've studied an awful lot in the animal kingdom, that this is also true of the animal world, that we operate under the same intuitive system that the rest of nature works on, like the horses and the cows and the dogs and the cats. And even down to the paramecium, we all have common things that relate to this inductive world, inductive reasoning world, where we try to draw conclusions based upon individual sets of observations. Now, this is a problem, because if I'm trying to take a series of observations and trying to draw a conclusion, there's an infinite number of possibilities in every situation. I can come up with an infinite different sets of possible causes. But the key is I have to select the most likely cause and based upon my experience as a human being and based upon the experience of my emotional system and my collection of knowledge that I've gained throughout living. And this, by the way, this type of inductive reasoning is what we call wisdom. And it only comes with age, and it only comes with experience. So there's a natural inclination to trust our elders. And there's a good reason for that, is because, guys, children, kids, students, there's no substitute for age, because while you were wrestling with a problem that to you is novel and unique, chances are that somebody that you know that's older than you has faced that identical problem before and resolved it in a satisfactory method. But nonetheless,
that's a great point. That's a great point.
There's two types of reasoning. There's inductive reasoning and there's deductive reasoning. And that sounds pretty academic. If we put it into the old caricature of right brain, left brain, I think it becomes easier to understand. And understand that the right brain, left brain thing has been overplayed and debunked and misused and to ad infinitum, but it helps as a learning mechanism, similar to a mnemonic device like Holmes is a good way. The word Holmes, Homes, is a good way to remember the Great Lakes, Huron, Ontario, Erie. So it's a convenient thing. So let's just think of it as that. So your right brain is your intuitive side, and your left brain is your logical side. And your logical brain is one that comes from training. This is what education, the main focus of education is to teach students the methodology of logical thinking and logical conclusions. The right brain side is the intuition. And again, this is where mistakes are made. But when do we decide that something is logical? We decide something, I've found, that we decide the truth is the truth if our right brains and our left brains are in some sort of accord, some sort of agreement with each other. And then we file those into what I call that information into the archives of truth, which means it's a truth now I can put into my brain, metaphorically, and upon that I can build higher and more complex truths. So we form a belief based on it's not agreement between left brain and right brain. There's a little nuance to it, and it has to do with it's not it's that there is not a disagreement between your right brain and left brain. So if there's a disagreement between your right brain and left brain, you can still accept something as truth. Because George said it, and George is really a reliable guy. But I have no better information right now than George said it. But I'm going to go with George. Uh, so
No,
that's
that's a great point, because sometimes we don't like what we hear, but the source that we're getting it from is reliable, so we can go with it until something else comes along.
right.
Till we get more information.
Right. The key is we all have a logic gate in our brains, which is this is it's the important thing for us to accept a belief is that we are our right brain and left brain are not in disagreement. That's not the same as saying they're in agreement. They're not in disagreement. If your left brain disagrees entirely, you're that logically this just doesn't make any sense. You will not accept that as a truth, as a belief. You won't. If your right brain, your gut feel says, I don't, this just doesn't feel right. You know, he's got all the credentials and he sure looks good on paper. But man, there's something about that gal that really bothers me. This, you will not accept that as a truth. So this is the construct of our emotional system, how it relates to our logical thinking processes, and how and why we reach conclusions that we call beliefs. That here we are back to where we started, this quest for the truth. So it's really a big circuitous methodology, but it's all rather logical and it all makes sense. But it takes more than just a cursory view to say that something is truthful or not truthful. It's important to know why you see something as truthful or not truthful, and it's important to understand and respect these two sides of us that are very real, the logical sides and the intuitive side. I happen to come from the world of engineering, which is highly logical. I was trained in the world of mathematics and physics and applied physics. And this is a very left brain world, if you will. You don't find many engineers that are comedians or artists. It's just not the sort of thing that these two powers seem to go hand in hand. When you do find somebody like that, it's like a Leonardo da Vinci. They have a tendency to really stand out. But then there's the other side, is the humanities, is the world of the right brain, and the world of intuition, and the world of gut feel, and the world of inference and inductive reasoning. And it's a wonderful world. But the problem, its inherent problem, is it's mistake prone. And we have to be alert to those mistakes.
Yeah, so the search for the truth and the search for reliable information is a process. And we've all heard who, what, where, when, and why. And sometimes that's a great litmus test when we do hear a story. It's kind of a warning. We can't believe it. That's not kind of a warning. It is a warning. Don't believe everything you read. Don't believe everything you see. Sometimes you can see it because it's firsthand, but don't believe everything that you hear. And the litmus test could be who, what, where, when, and why. And if you ask those questions, it would be like what our drill sergeant used to say: stay alert, stay alive. Stay informed, ask questions, follow the money. Who's telling you these things? Does it feel right? Does it seem kind of absurd? Does it sound plausible? Sometimes if something doesn't really sound plausible, that could be a red flag right there. Like everybody is this or everybody's that, which is totally a red flag. And then he gets to stay alive, stay alert, stay alive. But Dan and I have talked about this. This is not just survival. This is thriving. And if you're believing or falling for, if you're not checking out the information deductively or inductively, then it is a matter of survival. But if you're actually giving it due diligence, you're actually thriving as a curious and inquisitive and independent minded human being that's not, doesn't have an S on their forehead for sucker. And we see so many people falling in the same hole, the blind leading the blind. We've heard that. And that's, we as individuals can go a great length to not fall into that hole of misinformation or disinformation or malinformation if we just give that information the litmus test. And I don't want to ramble on and on. Coffee has a tendency to do that, but that's the way I see it. Time to thrive. And you will not thrive as an individual. We will not thrive as a society if everybody's falling for information that is not credible or valid or reliable. We're heading down, it'd be a runaway train of information, and we know where runaway trains end up. Somewhere off the track in a collision with destiny. And I have great faith in humankind and in the human mind. But lately, I got to tell you, Dan, it's been tough, man, to witness some of the things we have seen and heard and over the last few years, especially with the virus, and even with some of the things we see going on in our own backyard. Ask questions.
Well, I'd like to say that before we become too critical of others and how they fall prey to all of these different types of information, in defense of the human spirit and nature, which doesn't need my support to survive, but nonetheless, what we're going through is anthropological change in humanity. It's like it's every bit, this information age is every bit as powerful as the invention of fire or the invention of the wheel or the invention of the transistor. This has that type of impact, earth-changing, sociological changing implications. And as we have discussed before, John, it used to be, and people my age will remember this, that to write a paper, we used to have to invest time and money. We used to have to borrow the dad's car, drive to the library, and go through a bunch of books that the library may or may not have had in stock or that wasn't checked out, and see if you could find 3 sources for a point of view that you were trying to express. So find information required at that time and every time prior to that a substantial investment in resources, which, like I was saying, was actual cash money, but also time. And now the anthropological change that has happened is all of a sudden we have every bit of information that are available to us instantly. And we don't know what to do with it. And we're trying to figure out how to navigate this situation. Humanity has discovered that really social media is a substance, if you will, something like alcohol, that in moderation can really have definite benefits. And social lubrication's a good thing, but drunkenness is not. And what we're seeing and what we've learned is that social media feeds a disease that we all can be prone to of narcissism. And it tends to point the camera in every way, literally and figuratively, at ourselves and to show ourselves off to the rest of the world. Well, in doing so, though, I'm showing myself off, but you, as a receiver of the information I'm portraying, start saying, oh, this guy he doesn't pass the smell test. So what we're faced with now is, before, when you and I were young, truth came from Walter Cronkite.
Oh, yeah.
You had sources of information that you considered to be truthful or reliable. And now, all of a sudden, everybody has thousands of sources of conflicting information. And we have to decide, are we talking about reliable, mal, or noise? What is it we're listening to? And how does this affect the goal that I set for myself in trying to learn this particular truth? And this is an anthropological change. And poor humanity is going to have to continue to endure this intolerable, incessant period of narcissism until finally people recognize it for what it is and let it go. And again, to treat social media or information sources like you treat any drug in moderation, it's good. I maintain that if we could do cocaine in moderation, it would probably be a great party drug.
But yeah,
there's a number of conflicting pieces of information that hit you in the face with that. But so we have to understand that what we're doing, we don't know anything about. We've never been in a situation where information was free and the production of information is practically free. So I can produce whatever type of any type of information I want to support a cause. And this puts the burden on the individual, which is what the United States and the US Constitution did to begin with, was said, we believe that you are all individuals and that you all are going to have to learn to negotiate nature and the world without the help of government.
Well said. We've heard this before. The truth is out there. The X-Files television show used to have that at the end of each episode, and it is out there. And I just make the statement, look for it. Look for the truth. This is our time. This is your time. This is the time to join other human beings in critical thinking. This is the time to join us in reason and using logic to figure things out. It's the only way ahead for real freedom. And it's the only way ahead to find the truth in a manner that helps humankind to thrive. So I just thank you, Dan, for your insights and valuable information, which is reliable. No noise here. This is well-founded. And we want to thank the listeners for listening to another episode of The Time of the Reason. Your mind matters, and that's why we're doing this, because we want to be a reliable source of information on the issues that we're all challenged with. Any final thoughts, Dan?
No, just thanks for watching. This is a fascinating subject, and I'm glad your audience is interested. And this has just been a fascinating subject to me as a human being observer, but also as somebody that's trying to negotiate this world that's been put in front of me.
Thank you, Dan, and we appreciate that. And I look forward to our next conversation.
Thanks, John.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Time of the Reason podcast show. Now it's time to think. Logic and reason work. It's only common sense. Do your part.